Today is July 9th, and we are reviewing chapters 4 and 5. Seems like the theme will be conflict. And I always start off with our norms, and our norms for the meeting are we're sharing different resources. I share different resources on Thursday, and our resource right now is Reconcile. I like to hold my book up, by John Lederach. And we don't critique the book. So what Let's Talk About Culture is, it's just a deeper dive to sharpen your tools and gain some understanding about conflict, peacemaking, social justice. We talk about different areas of culture. And so we know there's so many resources out there, but the purpose of the book study is to dig into the resource that is of our topic for the evening or for the book study. And then through the duration of that book study, we just gain a deeper understanding of the author's perspective and content of the book. We will also be learning some skills that Tim will lead us through in peacemaking as we dig deeper into the book. So what we're going to do right now is use the chat bar, and anyone can join. If you haven't read the chapters, it's okay because you'll still be engaged. But at this time, we want to use the chat to enter some quotes or some aha moments from chapter 4 and 5 that you would like to share. So I'll give you a minute to enter your thoughts in the chat. And again, if you haven't read the chapters, it's okay because we'll be reviewing and you'll be enlightened by our reflections. So just 1 minute for that. Okay, so we're sharing in the chat any aha moments from chapter 4 and 5. Give you about 10 more seconds. All right, so what we did last time is kind of free-flowing to try to create a platform of comfort. You can listen in, or if you want to verbally share out, or Tim, what Noelle did last time is we read some of them off. So if you would like to start out, that would be great.
Yeah, I started, I posted it in the chat and I'll just read it here. So the one that I thought was interesting was that here it says, by way of God commitments in creation, conflict was, is, and will be a natural part of human experience. And I like that a lot because when we approach conflict, at least when I grew up approaching conflict, it felt and seemed and was foreign. Like, oh no, I'm in conflict. What do I do? This is going to be a mess. Or, wow, why did that go crazy the way it did? But when you shift your mind to think, no, actually, it's normal to have people with a different perspective, that in fact, God created it that way. Then it shifts to how can I listen? How can I learn? How can I grow? And that shift all takes place just with that little bit of an adjustment in how you think. Conflict's not foreign, conflict's natural, it's normal. So I really like that quote, and I think what it does is it kind of gives access to, oh, then I want to learn, how you're thinking about things, because it's so different than, clearly it's different than how I am. Otherwise we wouldn't be heading towards this disagreement.
I like that you shared that too, because I think about when I was in conflict, and I wasn't raised in a church, but in the church, I would hear this saying, God is not the author of confusion. So sometimes when someone is doing something, or, it seems as though they're causing a rift, but they're really trying to get their point across, that mind shift of saying, okay, what can we learn from this? What is the person really trying to convey versus they're trying to cause trouble?
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. I'll read yours. I'll read out Tanya's. Created to think, reflect, project, feel, and act. The challenge of reconciliation requires us to be present, respect, and acknowledge. That's deep. You want to share out a little bit, Tanya, on that?
I am really enjoying this book, so I want to say thank you, Kimberly, and Karis, and everyone that's a part of this this book study, because it has been very eye-opening, and it has caused me to begin to self-reflect and think about take my responsibility and take ownership of how I have viewed certain situations and my interactions with people. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. One of the other things, yes, that did stand out, but I also wanted to also add, reconciliation requires that we remember and change, that we do not quickly forgive and forget, but we remember and change. So thinking about, for me, reconciliation is a process. I know sometimes when you go through certain situations and they're painful, we want to just hurry up and get over the pain and not go through the process and take all of the necessary steps for the growth and the healing. So just being reminded that we have to see God in everybody, and we have to take responsibility and self-reflect on our own actions. So those are some of the takeaways, that I'm learning from reading this book.
Awesome. All right, so that's our sharing point. If no one else wants to share at this time, I'll turn it over to Tim, and he's gonna.
Karis had a quote.
Oh, go
Karis
ahead.
had a quote here as well. Thank you, Tanya, for what you shared. So Karis wrote, reconciliation requires that we remember and change, but with honesty about our experience and curiosity about the humanness of the other whom we fear. Is there a reason that was so meaningful, in particular for you, if you're open to sharing?
I think it just stood out. I just found it a little bit ironic to me that I guess kind of goes to the mention that he has regarding the word is eluding me right now. Sort of like the contradictions of the Bible, that the very person that you hate, you have to begin to understand them. And so when I read that part, thinking about some of the things that I've been through, realizing that I have to understand them doesn't necessarily mean at least what I was gathering from it. It doesn't necessarily mean I always have to be present with that person. But in order for, I think it's kind of both, in order for me to move on and me to get to that next level, I have to understand what may have caused them to be in that situation or what got them to there. So that's why that one stood out for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's interesting to hear you say that because, you know, the second quote that I put up was, be careful about what you hate. You may find that like a blindfold, it removes the ability to see.
I had a question. I wondered if anyone could touch upon it. He says in the book at one point, I was one of those. Or when and I know at the beginning he mentions that he was one of the people that the CIA was coming after. But in one of the chapters, I think it was chapter 4, he used that reference again. And I wondered if it meant something different this time, because then he goes into greater detail about reconciliation. And it was almost as if it was a foreshadow of the experience that he had with the colonel. And so I wondered if someone else got that impression, that he realized he was one of those people that could not see God in the other individual. And it was at that point when he saw the colonel's daughter coming. He's like, oh, he has a child like me. And so it was almost as if that's when he realized I was one of those people. And at that moment, he became this person that he writes about now in self-reflection. So I wondered if anyone else kind of had that. That was a big aha moment for me, where he foreshadowed about being able to see God in everyone.
It almost like he had a revelation in that moment, and he saw the humanness of the colonel.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, I agree, Karen. I saw that.
It was like, am I just seeing them? I thought, well, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it just seemed like the colonel represented, because he also talked about the Aesop and the brothers. So I thought that was sort of setting the table for the experience that was to come later in his own life. So.
Thank you, guys.
That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that forward.
Sorry, Rain, I don't know what's going on. Some people are having a hard time getting in, guys. Sorry to interrupt that. But that is very deep discussion. Let me unmute Rain. Hi, Rain. I'm trying to unmute you. Oh, there we go.
Hi, you guys. Thank you.
Hi. I want to give you the opportunity to share, and you guys, I'm only hiding my face because I'm trying to let others in. I don't know what's going on with Facebook, but we're gonna have to move to YouTube. But yeah, it's saying I have 2 meetings going on. So Rain, I don't know if you want to share out. Do you want to share any aha moments from chapter 4 or 5?
Honestly, I have not got that far. I've got all the way through 2, and I missed last week because I was reading.
That's
and,
okay.
But I am loving this book, and I'm glad to be here tonight and finally get in. And I appreciate these are always vulnerable topics, and I just appreciate how the book uses the most, perfect examples, like in chapter 1, to really set your course straight. And there's been a few situations where I feel, my ire kind of building, and I'm practicing.
And that's what we're doing. We're practicing and self-reflecting. So I appreciate you taking the time to join us. I even tell people, if you haven't read the book, get on. I'm going to post the beginning of the video after, but when we go into breakout rooms, we don't post that part. but still you can reflect and learn the tools that we're going to teach this evening. So thank you for sharing. Anybody else before Tim takes the lead? All right.
All right. So I think what you said, Karis, was, and Tanya as well, thank you both for sharing, was more or less at the center of the skills session that I developed. So both of you kind of captured the idea that I thought was most capturing to me. And I know that my wife led the session last time, and I just want to remind you, when we break into the role plays, we are choosing examples from our own life that we feel comfortable sharing in the role play with when we break into the breakout rooms. But we are also choosing examples that we think we can learn from, because they're not too serious. They're not too out there. One of the things that about these techniques is that they do work and they do take practice. And if you apply them to the most difficult scenario immediately, they will feel like they don't work. So that's why we want to start with in a space where, okay, this is a smaller thing. Let's try these techniques. Let's try this practice. Let's see that it works. And then stretch a little bit further beyond that. So the example I put together tonight follows that model. It's not a huge deal, and it follows the steps, but it's enough of a deal that I think you'll capture the idea. So I entitled this "Winning Others," and so I want to start with this quote from an author named William Ury, and what he says is, "Your goal is not to win over them, but to win them over." So once you take that, it's very similar to what John Paul Lederach is talking about, and Karis, you brought up, and Tanya, you brought up, this significant shift in self-understanding, right? Like John Paul Lederach talks about, and in that moment I realized something that he hadn't realized before. In a similar way, to a much lesser degree, and we're not talking about war here, but in a similar way, to a lesser degree, we're talking about this concept of when there is a conflict or a potential conflict, if you have that mind shift to say, I'm not trying to win over them, but I'm trying to win them over. Just that shift in thinking will invite a different approach. So I have 4 steps to do that. So, and we talked about this last week as well. The first thing you do is you identify the ideal situation. Okay, what's the ideal situation? Take a step back. What's the ideal situation? Step 2, then you identify what needs to be solved. Now step 3, this one is the skill that we're going to be honing in on today. It's make a mental note about how you perceive the other person. So that's what John Paul Lederach was talking about. He started thinking about that kernel in a different way. And then step 4, invite them to solve with you. So I'm going to take you through these 4 steps. 1, identify the ideal situation. Step 2, identify what needs to be solved. Step 3, make a mental note about how you think about them. And step 4, invite them to solve with you. And I'm going to use a context of me coaching a 3-year-old soccer team, which was a way bigger challenge than I thought it was going to be. I thought, oh, coaching 3-year-olds, great, this will be fun. And it ended up being a huge challenge. And you know, 3-year-olds are just so young. They're still working through their emotions. You're inviting them to try new things. Crying can happen. And it can happen a lot when you lose your first game 10-1. Now, you're not supposed to keep score with 3-year-olds, but for some reason, every parent there does keep score. And we went into the season to play our first game, and we just got completely hammered, and the kids were crying, and we lost, and the parents got upset. And I checked my email box, and I had received many emails, and they looked a lot like this. You are too hard on the kids. This is supposed to be fun. We lost 10-1 and my child cried. You did not prepare my child for this game. You must not know what you're doing. Now, let me remind you, I'm volunteering here to work with all of your kids, which includes practice and time and working with the parents. And I get a flood of emails from these parents who are all upset and angry. So that's my context, and I'm going to walk through these 4 steps real quick with you. So the first thing I do, identify what the ideal situation is. So I actually sat down, I wrote it down. I want the kids to have fun. I want the kids to learn life lessons. I want to win, I mean, whatever that really means for a 3-year-old team. I want this to be an experience where the kids bond with their parents. I want the parents to learn soccer basics because I'm just coaching them for 3 months. But when this is over, I want the parents to play with their kids and enjoy the game. So when the season is done, they can continue to play. So in my mind, I sat down, I wrote down the ideal situation. Then I said, okay, well, if that's what's ideal, how do I solve for this? Well, I need the parents to be bought in. I need the parents to pay attention during practice. I need to prepare the parents for how to respond to crying children, and I need the kids to improve. And so once I figured that out, I was actually pretty upset with the parents at that moment because those emails were ridiculous. I mean, we're talking about 3-year-old kids, and the emails were very long and they were not nice. So I had to take a moment and say, okay, these are parents who care about their children. They are taking time to introduce them to a sport. They want to enjoy the activity. They want positive memories. They want what's best for their children. So I had to have that mental picture of the people I was working with before I could engage them. And then I invited them to solve with me. So I sent an email to all the parents. I said, today we learned a lot. The team we lost to has played together for a year, so we learned how good a team can become after they've played together for a year. And I'm excited for practice, and I'm asking you to join in the drills. And then I responded to the emails individually. Thank you for your feedback. I'm excited to work with you and your child through this season. So what did that mean? The parents and the children bonded. The parents learned how to teach their kids techniques and drills. The kids cried less and less every game. The kids won the final game, even though we weren't keeping score. The kids had fun, and many of the kids continued to play the preceding year. So I was able to move towards that outcome. So that was a simple scenario. That was not complicated, but I've used these same 4 steps with the person who threatened to shut down my program, the person who stood between me and the execution of a $300,000 grant, the person who criticized my presentation to their boss, and their boss told me about it, the person who claims I missed your emails, but really I know they're avoiding me, the person who disrespected me in front of his colleagues while I was presenting, and the person who loses their temper, but I know they were misinformed. So I chose a simple scenario to walk through the 4 steps, but I've applied these same rules to much more complicated, much more difficult scenarios, and it's been really helpful. So I want to put my email here because something that may be crossing your mind is this question: is this possible even when? And you may have a scenario in your mind that is pretty large. So my encouragement to you is just contact me directly, because this, again, we're practicing on smaller things, thinking about how we can stretch to larger things. But if it is something really large and really serious, it requires more thought and more attention than an application of a skill we learned in 10 minutes. So that's the skill. Let me scroll back to here so it can just be on the screen. These are the 4 steps. So step 1, identify the ideal situation. Step 2, identify what needs to be solved. Step 3, make a mental note about how you perceive the person. And step 4, invite them to solve with you. So before we transition to the breakout where you can practice this with a partner, Kimberly, do you want to talk about this? Have you seen this? Do you see this as helpful? Do you want to weigh in for a second?
Absolutely. I've actually used this, the 4 questions. Well, you've walked me through this, and it really helped me also with reading the book to identify. So even now in my personal relationships, when something is going awry, I'm like, okay, let's talk about what, how did this really start? What are we really talking about? Not the after effects of whatever the scenario may be. Even an argument or a disagreement, or when you see something differently. So even looking at the number 4, when you see, you're basically categorizing the steps that you're going to take to meet agreement and maybe a solution. Sometimes you may agree to disagree, but what I've learned through using this process is we begin to see both perspectives in the situation, whatever that situation may be. Kind of like in the chapter we're reading, you see my quote in there that I quoted from this week. Now that I see conflict as a natural part of life, I mean, it seems like something easy to understand, but I've never been told that. I saw conflict as like, oh, you're drama, or get away from me. But now I see conflict, as bringing change. This is how we can bring change. So it's kind of like taking that step back and reflecting on what I learned. And I'm glad for this time because I get to practice as we will coming to more conflict. Think about what we're going through right now with the COVID. Even going to a grocery store, I had one of my peers very close to me tell someone to put their mask on. I said, think about what could have happened. You know what I mean? Because this person already has a perspective about why they're not wearing the mask. And that's a scenario we can use later. But then she called me today and said, hey, this person went off on people that told him to wear his mask. I said, see, that person could have hurt you. There's steps we can take. Go get the man. There's ways we can get the same message across and come to a common agreement to meet the goal or whatever the expectations of the environment that we're in. It's just the way that we convey it, if that makes sense, without using a specific scenario. So thank you for that. And I'm glad we get to practice.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. Yeah, that's totally right. When you take a step back from it and say, okay, what is the ideal situation? What do we need to solve for? Who are we working with? And how can we solve this together? Just making that mental shift in how you approach it. And like you said, Kimberly, if you think that conflict is natural and normal, it's much easier to use these steps. Does anyone have any questions about these 4 steps before we give you a chance to talk through it with your partners there?
Number 3 is sometimes a challenge. And I think what we really mean to say is, take a minute to see, the godlike person that we want to see out of that person, because sometimes it takes a long time to get past how we're perceiving that person. And so I liked, how when we're learning peacemaking, we're learning, about the Christ in every person, or, the good parts. But that number 3 is a practice in itself.
Correct. Yes.
And I'm glad you called that out, Rain, because when we practice on chapter 6, you're gonna see so many people within that chapter, even yourself, like where you stand and why do we all come to a head, because we all have different perspectives. So I really thank you for sharing that. So you're gonna be enlightened as you move on to chapter 6. Okay,
Any
are we
other?
ready to practice? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm ready if everyone else is ready. Yeah.
So because there's only 7 of us on, you may have 3 participants in your room instead of 2. So one thing, last time we didn't have enough time. Well, research shows that 12 minutes is a good time to practice. So divide that between time so everyone gets a turn. So we're using something minute right now, but when we practice, we can use it with a bigger situation. Okay? So I'm gonna send you into rooms. This is my 2nd time. Thank you guys for letting me practice on you, and it's gonna work this time.
And you are turning the recording off so people can turn on their cameras.
Yes, recording is going off.
I'm sorry, my video has been totally zoomed out, so it is not working. So sorry, just wanted to let you know.
Oh, no
That's
worries.
okay. We can hear your beautiful voice.
Aw, thank you,
Pretty.
Kim.
All right, so I'm
Proud
turning
of Kim.
off.
Tim, the way that I was looking at the 4 steps that you brought up really are the ideal situation at this moment for educators and leaders is to identify the ideal situation that every child, student, teacher, administrator, we come home safe to our families. So that's the ideal at this moment in time. So there's a lot of angst around that. So identifying what needs to be solved, and basically the analogy of we're building an airplane and building plans and asking everyone, at least in Utah, I'm from Utah, the great state of Utah, where we're busy. They just required everyone to wear a mask in school, but that was really based on teachers' reaction to, what about our health? Like, we can't walk into a building and not be protected. So the ideal is we want everyone to come home safe. And so the needs, like wearing a mask isn't going to hurt any child. It's going to just ensure that as educators, we can go, and administrators, we can all go home at the end of the day. So just kind of that perception, and that we're all building this plane and we're not off the runway, but like, just we're all in this boat together. And I just brought up the idea that one of our state superintendents said, I wasn't trained in pandemic planning or, and getting my own admin degree at the University of Utah. We didn't have any classes on emergency planning. And so just those things, like seeing the lens through the leader's eyes, through the students, through the families, like,
Yes.
nobody knows.
Wendy, you're so right.
Air.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. So then with that adjustment in like connecting with what the superintendent said all the way to what the students said, you feel like you can be collaborative or look for solutions?
Well, in the discussion, Terry and I brought up the need for grace and seeing the humanity and being present. And in the book, it talked about the along-sightedness, just kind of being that reconciliation art of accompaniment, so that we're working really on number 4, inviting them to solve it together. Like, let's solve this together so that all the voices are being heard.
Yes.
And I think if we do hear all the voices of parents' concerns or administrators' concerns and leaders and teachers, like when we really just listen, that cohesiveness brings an assurance, even though we can't have, like, there's no assurance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can't really solve it. We can just find that connectedness in our humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mindy broke it down. Even listening to you right now, I am a parent, but a parent of my kid going into school, if you were leading our group and saying that, I felt a sense of peace. Like my voice is heard because all voices are genuinely at the table. Like that's your goal. One of our, and I know we don't say school districts on here, but a school board member had said, we got to think about those families who, it's not that they want their kids to come back to school. They have no daycare. They have to work. They're essential. And what are they going to do? So we have to hear them. But without having that perspective or reflecting, it really would just be all about us. You know what I mean? Like this is just my needs. We're not thinking about what people don't have available to them. So thank you, Mindy. Wow.
Yeah. So what I do in Utah is I instruct immigrant students, so English language learners, and I work in inner city Salt Lake predominantly with aspiring Americans and refugee students who've fled political asylum. And like, even when my parents' voices and the students aren't at the table, it's like my students matter. And their
Wow.
parents might not be able to say it in English or Congolese or Kinyarwanda, but they're able to share that they know I have their best interest, that I want all of them to go home safely.
Powerful.
Like,
Powerful. So I want to tell you guys that we went over our time, believe it or not. It is 6:30, so I know if you have other things to do, but before we close, we want to share an opportunity with you for the most, to me, in my opinion, the next chapter is beyond powerful. So if you've gone ahead, you know what chapter 6 is about. But instead of people who've already read it doing the role play, we want to see if we can get someone that would be open, and you will work with Tim and I before our meeting on Thursday to role play Justice, Peace, Truth, and Mercy. There's actually a role play in this book, and you will see your parents, you will see your coworkers, your peers, your sister, your brother, your spouse in this chapter. So we just want to give that opportunity. I'm willing to do it if not, but we just want to give the opportunity for you to learn. So is anybody willing to take on being justice, peace, truth, or mercy? And the words are in the book. You get to read it, but you're going to role play it on Thursday. So we just want to see if you are open to it. We'd have you get on a little bit early next Thursday, but we're going to be ready to do this. Anybody interested?
Kimberly, are you asking for someone to take on the role of mercy and someone to take on the role of justice and someone to take on? Okay, I'll do a part.
All right, which one do you want?
Oh wow, whatever's left over, you choose. It doesn't. I'm okay with whatever.
Justice, peace, truth, mercy. When I say those words, which one rings clear to your heart?
I'll do peace.
All right, we got Tanya for peace. I want to volunteer Rain. Come on, I need you to be one.
Kimberly, I'll do justice. Excuse me.
All right, justice.
Yes.
All right, Karis is justice. Come on. Look at Terry. I know you moving. You retired.
No, I don't want what happened this time to happen again. So no, not this time. Maybe the next one.
So Terry, Karis is justice. Tanya, did you say your peace?
Yes.
Okay.
you want me to do truth?
Yes, Mandy, truth.
Out there, I don't. But little T, maybe not big T.
Can you do me a favor and just type it in the chat for me? My pen is not working. Mindy, can you type truth, and Tanya peace, and Karis justice? And so we need a mercy. Who has mercy out here? All right, Ray, you gonna give us mercy? All right, I'm excited. And I'm excited for your daughter in Sacramento. We gotta talk about that later. But definitely join us Thursday. And what I'm gonna do is, well, Tim, how do we want to do it? We'll send them an invite or have them get on a little while before. Can they get on at 5, you think?
If you have all their emails,